pre-recorded video.
Welcome, everyone. I'm pleased to present this work that was a collaboration between several of us at Arizona State University, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and the University of Utah. I'm the last author here, Visar Berisha, and very briefly in this paper, we're interested in better understanding the scores provided by systems that do or that perform automatic pronunciation evaluation. So let's go ahead and get started. So pronunciation errors are the result of a deviation in speech acoustics relative to typical speech production. And automated phone-level pronunciation systems evaluate this acoustic deviation in a spoken utterance relative to a corpus of typical speech on a phoneme by phoneme basis. This is obviously useful for several downstream, both clinical and non-clinical applications. So for example, in second language learning applications, computerized automatic pronunciation training systems might use systems that perform automated evaluation of pronunciation in an effort to improve pronunciation errors. Or they can be used in clinical applications to evaluate speech sound disorders arising from, say, cleft lip and palate, or dysarthria, or other conditions that result in pathological speech. And in these applications, or across these applications, the current standard of clinical care is really subjective perceptual evaluation by trained clinicians. And so these automated objective systems provide an appealing alternative. So our focus is really on systems that perform phone-level analysis of production. And these systems rely on forced alignment. So you do phoneme by phoneme alignment of text to acoustics, and then evaluate each phoneme relative to a database of correctly produced speech. So then it stands to reason that if there's any alignment errors, this would have a downstream impact on the output of the automatic evaluation system. And so really the fundamental question that we want to answer in this work is, what is the impact of alignment errors on this goodness of pronunciation? And a very high level overview of how automatic goodness of pronunciation systems work. We can split them up into two parts. So the input to the system is a spoken utterance and a target. So a participant will read a target sentence, for example. In this case, it's just the short phrase, the supermarket. The first step is a forced alignment, so aligning the acoustics to the text and to a phoneme by phoneme pronunciation of the text. And so the output here is both the acoustics and the start and end points of each phoneme. And then a secondary step whereby you have a pre-trained acoustic model on typical speech. And for each of the phonemes that was aligned in the previous step, you calculate two probabilities. First, you calculate the probability that of the acoustic model for that phoneme under consideration. So let's say we're considering the phoneme k. You calculate the probability of the acoustics given k, and you calculate the maximum probability across all phonemes in your pronunciation dictionary. And hopefully these two are the same, right? If the target phoneme probability is the same as the maximum across all other phonemes, then the acoustic model provides the same value, and so you have the log of 1/1, which is 0, and that's the largest score that you can get. Of course, if there's another phoneme, not the target phoneme, that results in a higher probability, then the quantity here inside the parentheses is less than 1, and the log of that is negative. And so this likelihood ratio is what determines the acoustic deviation of any given phoneme, provided that it's correctly aligned relative to a correctly pronounced representation trained on a corpus of typically developing speech. And so, of course, the output then is this log likelihood ratio. Okay. So let's consider the impact of alignment errors on this GOP, goodness of pronunciation, short for goodness of pronunciation. So let's say you have a speaker with imprecise articulation. This imprecise articulation will cause forced alignment errors, which we denote by TE. It'll also cause phoneme-level acoustic mismatch. So we're calling this capital GM. So this is to denote a goodness of pronunciation output where the forced alignment is actually done manually. So it's the same as this previous system, except we remove the automatic forced alignment with a human performing the forced alignment. And the automatic GOP score is then the result of these two types of errors, right? So the output of the system is impacted by errors in forced alignment, and differences in acoustic deviation is measured by this likelihood ratio estimation. We want to understand and decouple the errors associated with forced alignment and the phone level acoustic mismatch. We want to decouple their contributions to the automatic GOP. So in order to do this, we have two corpora that I'll describe, and we follow two steps. The input obviously is both the speech and the transcription, and we go through a forced alignment system to compute the GOP per the normal process. So we call that the automatic GOP. In parallel, we also compute manual alignments. And so in this case, we're removing the first step, the forced alignment step, with gold standard provided by trained experts, and compute the GOP. This allows us to isolate just the acoustic mismatch and to remove the impact of any forced alignment errors, because there's no forced alignment errors down this path. And so we have the manual GOP. So the automatic GOP and the manual GOP, and we can look at the difference between the manual alignment and the forced alignment to calculate that third variable TE here in this diagram. Okay. Now, to evaluate and to decouple their impact, we look at this on two separate corpora. So we look at a corpus of typically developing children's speech. It's 42 children between ages of 3 and 6, and speech from kids with cleft palate. So this is a corpus of 60 children between ages 5 and 7 years old. The manual alignments were done by trained experts, and they effectively corrected the output of the Montreal forced aligner on a phoneme by phoneme basis. The automatic alignments were done using a pre-trained DNN HMM model. Now, we're going to look at the impact of these errors using 3 linear models. What we're interested in understanding is the impact of forced alignment errors and the impact of acoustic deviation as measured by the GOP with manual alignment, not forced alignment. And so we look at 3 models. The first model is just a simple linear model that relates GA, the automatic GOP, with the forced alignment errors TE. The second model is one that relates GA with the acoustic deviation, GM. And then the third model is a bivariate linear model that predicts GA using both the forced alignment errors and the acoustic deviation. And let's get into some of the results here. So in this figure, we show the table, or in this table, we show the percent variance explained by each of the 3 models. So for model 1, the values indicate what percent of the variance in the automatic GOP is explained by forced alignment errors. And we have the TDC corpus, the typically developing corpus, and the cleft palate corpus here. Under model 2, the values indicate what percent of the variance in automatic GOP is explained by the manual alignment approach, or what we're calling the acoustic deviation. And then finally, model 3, the values indicate what percent of the variance in the automatic GOP is explained by both alignment errors and acoustic deviation. So and again, this analysis is done across both databases. So some observations from this data. And we do this, I forgot to mention this, but we do this across many different phoneme categories. So vowels, approximants, nasals, stops, fricatives, and then an average across all phonemes. So some observations based on this data. Across all categories in both databases, more of the variance in automatic GOP is captured by acoustic deviation rather than the forced alignment error. So this is just comparing model 2 with model 1. The percent variance explained by model 2 is much, much greater. And so the implication of this is that this automatic GOP seems to be largely capturing the acoustic mismatch as measured by the likelihood ratio that I described earlier, and not the alignment error. Second observation is that with the exception of nasals, the variance explained in the automatic GOP from the acoustic deviation is greater than 95% in all other phoneme categories. That's much higher than we originally expected. We expected that the forced alignment errors would have some greater magnitude of impact. The nasals themselves are interesting. The R-squared values, the percent variance explained values, are lower than all the other phonemes. And the reasoning for that, or at least our hypothesis, is that this could be due to the inherent variability in the data, as the sample size for nasals was considerably lower than it was for all the other phoneme categories in this set of speech elicitation tests. I didn't talk much about the speech elicitation tests, but given that these were children, these were effectively imitation tasks. So the clinician read a sentence and asked the child to imitate it, and the child did so. Okay. So in this table, we'll do a deeper dive on model 3. So just as a reminder, model 3 was the one that considered both forced alignment errors and acoustic deviation to predict the manual, to predict the output of the GOP. And when explaining the variance in the automatic GOP, it's pretty clear across all of these phoneme categories that the acoustic deviation is what explains most of the variance. So it's just I guess an overview of how to look at this table and how to interpret it. Each one of the rows here represents a single linear model. The two variables in that model are TE and GM. The response variable is GA. We have here the coefficients, the standard deviation, the T statistic that explains the impact of that one variable, or that quantifies the impact of that one variable on the response, and then the p-value. So as you see from the table, in most cases, the only significant result is the one associated with GM, in other words, the acoustic deviation. So it's the acoustic deviation that's most important in predicting what the value of the GOP will be. For the few phoneme categories where the forced alignment error has a significant impact, the effect size of this impact is much smaller. So you can see that from the T statistic. You know, the T value for the acoustic deviation is 23, whereas for the forced alignment errors, it's negative 1.9. So it's orders of magnitude lower. So this indicates that the automatic GOP assessment is relatively robust to alignment errors. And in our analysis, the alignment errors for the TBC corpus were on the order of about 35 milliseconds, and they only have a small impact on the GOP. For the CP corpus, the errors were on the order of 50 milliseconds or so, as measured from the midpoint of each phoneme to the midpoint of the other phoneme. So there's still considerable overlap between the phonemes on average. And so this could be the reason why the acoustic deviation ended up being much more important than the forced alignment errors. Comparing across the two databases, I think it's clear that the magnitude of the errors, the forced alignment errors in the CP database is greater, and so as a result, on average, they have a larger impact on the automatic GOP, but still the trend is consistent across both databases. That is, the acoustic deviation is what drives most of the variability in the automatic GOP. One important limitation to keep in mind here, in our models, we obviously assumed a linear relationship between these variables. However, this assumption may not be valid in our cases. In fact, some of our recent analysis shows that the relationship may actually be log linear. And just some concluding remarks and setting up future work here. The goal of this work was to evaluate the impact of forced alignment errors on automatic pronunciation evaluation algorithms. Surprisingly, they had little impact on automatic phone level pronunciation scores. Most of the variability in the automatic GOP was actually explained by the acoustic deviation. And there's multiple ways that we'd like to extend this analysis. The first is via nonlinear modeling, so extending this beyond just simple linear models. And then, more interestingly, getting a better understanding of the acoustic models and their impact on the automatic pronunciation scores. You know, that was largely ignored here in this work. We just assumed that the GOP algorithm was a black box, but it would be interesting to evaluate what the impact of the composition of these models are on the output of these systems. Okay, thank you. Now I'll take some questions.
So since we are getting late, bit late, one maximum two questions for Visar, who is online to answer.
All right, thank you very much for your presentation. I had maybe a two-stage question. First, regarding the databases that you use, I don't really know them. So first, regarding the text, do you already have phonetic transcript, or do you use some algorithm to transform the text into phonemes?
So there's a pronunciation dictionary, okay, and you convert it's not a phonetic transcription, it's actually a transcription. You have the target, and then the target is converted to a sequence of phonemes based on a pronunciation dictionary.
Okay, very interesting. And well, and I was wondering if you had only a database with only text, and if you would use a system to convert text into phoneme, if you could analyze maybe the error of such a system into the GOP with a similar technique. Do you think that would be possible or interesting research?
Are you saying a synthetic speech system?
Yeah.
So something that, yeah. I mean, I actually think that's sort of interesting. There's some loss functions out there that I've seen a couple of papers where people have looked at things like, I don't know if it's exactly GOP, but loss functions that are meant to mimic correctly pronounced speech, and they're actually used as a part of the training of these systems. So I think that's a good thought, and I think people are actually doing things like that right now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.